China apparently is like the NCAA and others who want to bully those who speak out against the repressive tactics they use against their own people. As I mentioned, I was out last week. I was actually traveling over the weekend, and I got a text from former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo saying, "Did you see that China added you to the list?" I wasn't sure what list he was referring to, but then he followed up and let me know that over the weekend, Gail Manchin, who is the chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom this year — last year I was the chair, this year she is the chair and I'm the vice chair — that they sanctioned the two of us in response to our condemnation of that country's human rights violations and abuses against the predominantly Muslim Uyghurs and members of other ethnic and religious minority groups. China also sanctioned Canadian lawmaker Michael Chang, vice chair of the Parliament's Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Now, according to my next guest, China may have to sanction a whole lot more people if they are targeting anyone who calls out China's Communist Party's genocidal crimes against religious and ethnic minorities in that country. With me now to talk about it is Gordon G. Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. He can be found on Twitter with the handle @GordonG.Chang. Gordon, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you, Tony, and congratulations on being sanctioned by China. It's a great honor. So we very much send our best to you.
Well, thank you for that, Gordon. My sense is that they're starting to feel the pressure from the international community because we're not the only ones talking about it. Obviously, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, this is a high priority for us. But other countries have spoken out as the curtain has been pulled back on the repressive tactics that they've been using on their own people. I think this is a part of trying to save face internationally.
Yes, and it's not just the United States. It's also Canada, Britain, and the European Union. There is condemnation across the world at this. And Beijing finds itself cornered. And right now it is lashing out. It is going after, for instance, companies, most notably H&M, the Swedish retailer, but against other companies as well. And I think that this is really surprising in a sense, because if you go back about 6 months, maybe a year, people were saying, oh, nobody really cares about the Uyghurs. Well, China cares about the Uyghurs. And what it did was it went out and engaged in tactics which just the rest of the world abhorred. And now the world is starting to come together on this.
So who might be next on China's list?
It really could be anybody. And it's largely, I think, going to be foreign companies, because we have seen Beijing intimidate some companies. You talked about cowardice. Some companies actually did withdraw their statements on Xinjiang cotton, which is what many companies have issued statements on. But we're seeing China go after and lashing out after foreign businesses. So I'd imagine more of them. There's going to be a struggle. China is going to intimidate companies, and consumers are then going to react. And companies are going to find themselves, they want to do business in China, so they want to adhere to Communist Party rules, but nonetheless, they've got to sell to us. So we've got inordinate power over these companies like H&M, like Nike, and like the others.
Would they have taken this action if Donald Trump was still president?
I don't think so. But right now, they were very afraid of President Trump. And they were afraid of him not because he was taking measures they didn't like, but because he was unpredictable and he was not controllable. They look at Biden, and first of all, they don't respect him. They think they own him. And we know this. This is not just speculation, because we hear this from elite voices in Beijing. But they believe that the United States is in terminal decline. And I think there's some real problems going on in Beijing, because they're lashing out at a number of different targets all at the same time. They're using Cultural Revolution-style language against diplomats in Canada, for instance. This is getting to be serious.
Yeah, I mean, the actual wording they used in their sanction against me and Gail is that if we don't back off, we're going to get our fingers burned, which I found kind of as a veiled threat.
Yes, it is a threat, and many people may say that's figurative, but they would very much like to do that. I mean, they do that to their own people. They certainly would do it to foreigners if they had the opportunity.
So being sanctioned by China, as I understand it, means I can't go to mainland China, I can't go to Hong Kong, and people in China can't do business with me. That's the extent of the sanction. I don't know if it still means that I can shop at Walmart, since most of their products are made in China, or not. But clearly these sanctions are not going to affect me because I had no plans to go to China. Our efforts actually to go there as commissioners have been rebuffed repeatedly by the Chinese Communist Party.
Yes, and no American should go to China right now, including Hong Kong, because it's exceedingly dangerous. They're taking foreigners as hostages, as we know about the two Canadians, the two Michaels as they're called, and so it's not safe for foreigners in China right now.
So what does the Biden administration need to be doing in response to this escalation, baseless sanctioning that is taking place by China?
I think that in general, the Biden administration should be imposing the most severe costs on China for a number of things, including sanctions on you, Mrs. Manchin, and others. Right now, we hear the Biden team talk about calling on China to do this or to do that, and they have imposed some pretty meaningless sanctions on the Chinese in connection with Hong Kong and with Xinjiang. But they really need to step this up, largely because if we don't, they will not respect us. We heard Secretary of State Blinken yesterday talk to CNN saying they don't want to impose costs on China for the coronavirus. Well, today, I think we've crossed the 550,000 death mark from coronavirus, a disease that Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, deliberately spread beyond China's borders. There's got to be some cost because we need to deter the Chinese from doing this again.
Gordon Chang, as I mentioned, I think China's actions here is to save face. I think they're becoming a little desperate to take these types of actions. This would suggest to me that China has some vulnerabilities. What, in your view, is China's greatest vulnerabilities right now that could be, I'll use the term, exploited or taken advantage of by the Biden administration to put greater pressure to address the human rights issues that have been the focus of the international community?
Well, one of them we don't talk about, which could be the greatest short-term vulnerability, is the inability of China to feed itself. It was having problems through 2019, but last year was a terrible year for food security. And that's why they bought more and more of U.S. ag, and they bought more ag around the world. Long term, their greatest vulnerability is the demographics. They're going to lose at least two-thirds of their population this century, probably more, maybe even as much as three-quarters. China is going to suffer the worst demographic collapse in history in the absence of war or pestilence. There's so many other problems, Tony, from the economy to their environment, you name it.
So they're not really, when you look at long term, they're not ascending. It's more of a blip. And because of the demographics, their one-child policy being a great fuel for that demographic decline, we just need to take policies that basically keep them at bay and in check.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if we can get through, this is a very terrible time. It's a time where China can lash out. 2020s, I think, are the period of the greatest vulnerability to China. You know, people talk about 2030s, 2040s, when they assume China will be ascendant. No, the problems are now. We can get through this decade. We probably can coast through the end of the century.
So they are vulnerable, therefore more prone to take drastic actions to try to head off that decline.
Yes, and we're seeing this right now as they're trying to take that reef from the Philippines, Whitsun Reef. This is another act of aggression. They've also got their troops deep into India, into Nepal. They're threatening Taiwan and Japan. All around their periphery, they're taking on their neighbors one by one. Actually, at the same time, this is not something that a stable regime does.
Any chance that through diplomatic means they could become a better neighbor in the global community?
Without the Communist Party, yes, we can get along with China. We have gotten along with China for decades and decades and decades before the Communist Revolution. We can get along with them with a democratic government there. It's going to take some time for them to do that, but with the Communist Party, it's inherently hostile to us because we stand for freedom and democracy, and that, they believe, is an existential threat to them.
Which is why they are so repressive of their own people, to make sure that the Communist Party maintains that control over the country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're moving back to totalitarianism. It's no longer authoritarianism there. They're going to their social credit system, their surveillance cameras, all of their means of keeping the Chinese people in check. And also, most worryingly, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, their mass mobilization campaigns, reminiscent of the pre-Cultural Revolution period.
All right, Gordon, one final question just to summarize. I know you already hit this, but just for the benefit of our listeners, top 3 items that you think the Biden administration should be doing right now as it pertains to China.
First thing, impose costs for the coronavirus epidemic. We can't let them think that they can spread it again. We've got to stop their theft of U.S. intellectual property, probably $500 billion a year. And, in terms of genocide, we're a party to the Genocide Convention that requires us to stop genocide in China. Whatever it takes, that's what we have to do. Those are the top 3.
All right, Gordon C. Chang, thanks so much for joining us today. As always, great to talk with you.